Welcome to Life Stories, where every tale is a journey of love, betrayal, and the unexpected twists that shape our lives. Today, we share the story of Jack and Lily, a couple whose perfect wedding day is thrown into chaos by a shocking revelation. Amidst love and family tensions, they must confront the consequences of betrayal and learn what truly matters in life. Will their bond survive the ultimate test? Or will the weight of the past tear them apart? Join us as we dive into this emotional roller coaster. Don't forget to subscribe to start today's story. It was the day that Lily had dreamed of for years. The garden was transformed into a picture-perfect setting. Fresh flowers filled the air with a sweet fragrance, and the soft tunes of a violin floated gently across the grounds. Everything looked exactly how she had imagined. The pristine white tents shimmered beneath the warm Californian sun. Sparkling crystal glasses adorned the tables, and guests in their finest attire moved gracefully through the garden. There was something magical about that day, like something out of a fairy tale. And Lily, the bride, was at the center of it all. Her dress was a beautiful sea of lace, flowing all the way down to the ground, the intricate patterns catching the light as she moved. The smile on her face, radiant and warm, could have rivaled the sunshine that bathed the event. Yet beneath her calm and graceful demeanor, there was a storm of nerves swirling within her. She had planned every detail of this wedding for months, ensuring that everything would be perfect. Her hands shook as she clutched her bouquet, her mind racing with the hope that nothing would go wrong. She whispered to herself, "Just breathe," trying to calm the racing thoughts. Standing beside her, with his hand on her arm, was Jack, her soon-to-be husband. Dressed in a classic black tuxedo, he stood tall and confident, but his mind was far from at ease. Beneath his polished exterior, he was scanning the faces of the guests in the crowd, searching for one person in particular, his older brother, Ben. Ben had been absent from Jack's life for years, their relationship strained ever since they had fought over the family business. Jack had taken over after their father's retirement, and Ben had felt betrayed. The bitterness had festered to the point where Ben left California altogether, only returning for their father's sake. Jack hadn't wanted Ben at the wedding, but their father had insisted. Family is family, Robert had said, his words carrying the weight of years of unspoken tensions. Jack had tried to push his brother from his mind, focusing on the woman he loved and the joyous moment they were about to share. Yet, as he stood there, his eyes kept darting through the crowd, hoping to spot Ben. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. His gut was telling him that this day, which should have been the happiest of their lives, was already starting to feel off. And then, he noticed it. Max, his loyal German shepherd, was sitting at the back of the garden, tied to a post, his leash wrapped securely around it. Max had been with Jack for years, a gift from his late mother, and always a steady, calming presence. The dog had a quiet way of making Jack feel safe, no matter what. But today, something was different. Max, who had always been calm and obedient, was restless. He paced back and forth, his ears pointed, eyes fixed on something in the distance. Then, the dog let out a low bark. "Why is he acting like that?" Jack muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing as he watched Max's behavior grow more erratic. Lily, who had been caught up in the whirlwind of the ceremony, looked up at him. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft, trying to understand his sudden tension. "It's Max," Jack replied, his frown deepening. "He's barking, but he never barks at nothing." Lily followed his gaze and shrugged, trying to brush off the unease. "Maybe he's just nervous, like the rest of us. It's a big day for him, too," she said, offering a light laugh to ease his tension. But Jack didn't feel reassured. His eyes remained fixed on Max, who was now pacing in tight circles, his growls low but unmistakable. The ceremony continued without incident, and for a time, everything seemed perfect. The pastor's voice was steady, guiding them through their vows, and the guests smiled through teary eyes as the couple exchanged rings. Max had even quieted down for a while, and Jack started to feel a sense of relief. Perhaps it had just been nerves, nothing more. But as the pastor said, "You may now kiss the bride," a sharp bark interrupted the silence. Max's barking was louder this time. More insistent, like something was wrong. Heads turned toward the dog. And a few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. A few whispers rose in the air. "Do something about that dog," someone muttered from the front row, the voice harsh with annoyance. It was Adora, Lily's mother, her face contorted in frustration. She had never been fond of Max. But today, her irritation was palpable. "It's ruining the moment," she hissed. Jack signaled to one of the ushers, who hurried over to Max and knelt beside him, attempting to calm him down. The usher patted Max's head and whispered something. And for a brief moment, the barking stopped. But then, instead of falling silent, the dog's growling deepened. His eyes were fixed on the towering white wedding cake at the center of the reception area. The cake that had been the pride of the entire event. It was 3 tiers of perfection, decorated with delicate sugar flowers and golden ribbons. Everyone had admired it as they arrived, snapping photos and marveling at how stunning it looked. But now, as Max growled and circled the cake, unease spread through the crowd like wildfire. "What's his problem with the cake?" someone murmured, their voice laced with suspicion. "Maybe he smells food," another guest offered, trying to brush off the tension with a light-hearted joke. But the crowd wasn't so easily calmed, and whispers began to spread. Max, for reasons no one could explain, seemed to be reacting to the cake in a way that made everyone uncomfortable. His behavior felt wrong, out of place, and Jack felt a knot tighten in his stomach. What was happening? Why did the dog act like this? And why, just why, did it have to happen now, on the day that was supposed to be perfect? As the ceremony continued, there was an unspoken tension in the air, a feeling that something wasn't quite right. Max's unsettling behavior was impossible to ignore, and Jack could see that Lily, despite her efforts to remain calm, was growing increasingly uneasy. Her eyes kept drifting toward the cake, the beautiful centerpiece of the event, as if she too could sense something amiss. But she tried to stay composed, pushing the thoughts away. It was their wedding day after all, and they couldn't let anything ruin it. The guests were slowly beginning to murmur about Max's strange reaction. They couldn't deny the oddness of it, the growling, the way he was fixated on the cake. Even Adora, Lily's mother, who had initially dismissed the idea, was now looking more suspicious. Her discomfort was written across her face. But in the midst of the whispers, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His mind raced, and he looked again at Max, who was still pacing back and forth. When the pastor gave them the cue to kiss, the moment was interrupted once more by Max's insistent barking. The guests now turned their attention fully to the dog, and Jack saw that Lily, too, was growing worried. "We have to do something about this," she whispered, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "I'll handle it," Jack said firmly, his voice more composed than he felt. He motioned for an usher to approach Max and try once again to calm him. But when the usher knelt and patted the dog, Max only grew more agitated. The barking turned into low, menacing growls, his eyes never leaving the cake. "Is something wrong with the cake?" Lily asked quietly, her voice almost drowned out by the noise of the crowd. Jack didn't know how to answer. But before he could say anything, the usher tried to pull Max back, and the dog resisted, barking louder than ever. Jack's heart started pounding, the unease from earlier turning into a deep, gnawing sense of dread. "This can't be happening," he muttered under his breath, his grip on Lily's hand tightening. "Maybe we should check the cake," Lily said softly, her voice shaking. She looked at him, her eyes wide with worry. There was no longer any ignoring the fact that Max's behavior seemed to be linked to the cake. Jack hesitated, the weight of the situation pressing on him. But seeing the fear in Lily's eyes, he knew there was no other option. If something was wrong, they had to find out now. "Fine," he said reluctantly, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked at the usher. "Bring the cake over here, please." The usher nodded in, with the help of a few others, carefully moved the cake from its stage and placed it on a nearby table. The guests watched in silence, their unease palpable, as Jack and Lily stood side by side, their gaze fixed on the wedding cake. Max, meanwhile, was still growling, his body tense, his focus entirely on the cake. It was then that a guest, an elderly woman named Margaret, stepped forward. She had always been a firm believer in superstitions and signs. And in that moment, her voice carried a sense of certainty. Dogs can sense things humans can't, Margaret said, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Max. That dog is trying to tell us something. Something we need to listen to. Jack frowned, his mind racing. He didn't believe in omens or signs. He wasn't sure what to think. But one thing was becoming clearer. They had to investigate further. Lily, still holding Jack's hand tightly, spoke in a low voice. Do you think something's wrong with the cake? I don't know, Jack said, his voice tight with frustration. But I'm not taking any chances. Just as he was about to turn toward the cake, Adora, Lily's mother, interrupted with a sharp tone. This is ridiculous. You want to stop the wedding for a dog barking? We don't have time for this nonsense. We're here to celebrate, not to indulge in superstitions. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play. Lily's expression was filled with doubt, her mind racing with the possibilities. She was starting to wonder, what if Max had seen something they hadn't? Maybe we should check, Lily said, her voice small but resolute. She looked at Jack, her eyes filled with uncertainty. Just to be sure. Jack wanted to say no, to tell her to forget it. But as he glanced at Max again, still staring at the cake with unwavering focus, something inside him shifted. This wasn't about superstition. This was about listening to their instincts. And Max, his loyal dog, was clearly trying to warn them. All right, Jack said, taking a deep breath. Let's check the cake. They carefully approached the cake, the atmosphere now heavy with tension. The guests watched quietly, their eyes darting nervously between the cake, the dog, and the bride and groom. Jack glanced at the baker, a petite woman named Nessa, who had been standing nearby, her hands trembling as she watched the unfolding drama. Can you take a look? Jack asked her, his voice strained. Maybe there's something wrong with the cake. Nessa's face paled, and she hesitated for a moment, clearly shaken. I baked it myself, she stammered. There's nothing wrong with it. I swear, I tasted it this morning before bringing it here. Margaret spoke again, her voice firm. We just want to make sure. Please, let's check. Reluctantly, Nessa stepped forward, her hands shaking as she reached for a knife. I'll cut a small piece, she said, just to prove there's nothing wrong. Jack nodded, his mind still racing, but as the knife sliced into the bottom tier of the cake, something seemed to change. Max's growling intensified. It was then that Lily spoke again, her voice almost a whisper. Wait, she said, let the dog sniff it first. Jack glanced at her, surprised by her suggestion, but something in her voice made him pause. He looked down at Max, who was now on high alert, his ears pricked and his body tense. Jack hesitated for a moment but then knelt down, bringing Max closer to the cake. Max sniffed the slice, his nose twitching rapidly, and then let out a low, almost guttural growl. It was clear now, there was something wrong with the cake. And Max was trying to tell them. Something's not right, Lily whispered, her eyes wide with fear. The tension in the air was palpable as Nessa's face turned ashen. And the guests murmured among themselves. The celebration had taken a sharp, terrifying turn, and Jack knew that they had to get to the bottom of this. No matter the cost. The stillness of the moment hung heavy in the air, broken only by the soft growl emanating from Max, whose gaze was fixed firmly on the slice of cake. Everyone stood frozen, the weight of the realization settling over them like a thick fog. No one spoke at first. The guests, once chatting excitedly about the wedding, now exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to react to the scene unfolding before them. Jack's heart was pounding in his chest. This wasn't just some harmless misunderstanding, this was real. Poison had been found in the cake. And there was only one question left. Who had done this? The baker, Nessa, stood trembling, her hands clutched in front of her, her face pale with disbelief. I swear, I didn't put anything in the cake, she stammered, her voice shaky. I followed the recipe. Everything was perfect. I don't understand. Jack turned to look at Lily, his eyes searching hers for any hint of understanding. They both knew that if something wasn't done, they would never be able to move past this day. There was no time to waste. The cake, once the pride of the entire event, was now a symbol of horror. His mind raced, he had to act. And he had to act fast. We need to figure out who did this, Jack said, his voice firm but strained. Almost a whisper. He turned toward the crowd, his eyes scanning the faces of the guests. Among them, his gaze landed on one person who stood apart from the chaos, Ben. Jack's older brother had been quiet. Too quiet. Throughout the whole ordeal, he was leaning against a tree at the far side of the garden. His arms crossed, his expression unreadable. There was something unsettling about the way Ben stood there, detached from the situation. Lily noticed it too. Jack, look at Ben, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He's not reacting like everyone else. Jack didn't need to be told twice. His suspicion deepened as he watched Ben's aloof posture, the indifference in his eyes. For years, Jack had tried to push aside the unresolved issues between them, the fight over the family business, the bitterness that had been left to fester, but now, as the tension in the air became unbearable, the cracks in their relationship seemed to widen. He had to confront Ben, and now was the time. He took a deep breath and started walking toward his brother. The guests murmured as Jack approached, their eyes following his every step. Max's growls continued to reverberate through the garden, adding to the palpable tension. Ben, Jack said, his voice steady but laced with emotion. We need to talk. Ben looked up slowly, his eyes narrowing as he regarded his brother. There was a flicker of something in his gaze, defensiveness, maybe even guilt, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. I'm not involved in this, Jack, Ben said, his tone dismissive. I don't know what's going on. But this is just a distraction. It's ridiculous. Can't we just focus on the wedding? Jack's jaw clenched. Distraction? People's lives could have been at risk. Ben, this isn't just about a ruined cake. This is about someone trying to sabotage everything. And I need to know who. There was a brief silence, the weight of Jack's words sinking in. Ben shifted uncomfortably but refused to meet his brother's eyes. You don't trust me, do you? Ben muttered, almost to himself. You never have. Jack's eyes narrowed. Trust? After everything? Ben, I'm trying to save this day. I'm trying to figure out who did this. And right now, it's starting to look like you're the one who might know more than you're letting on. Ben's eyes flickered with something, resentment. Perhaps, but before he could respond, the tension broke with a sharp, unexpected noise. The guests gasped as Ben straightened up, his shoulders slumping in resignation. His eyes met Jack's with an expression that was equal parts bitterness and regret. I did it, Ben admitted, his voice heavy with a mixture of guilt and frustration. I wanted to ruin it. I thought if I did this, I'd show you that I wasn't just some afterthought. That I wasn't going to just sit back and watch you take everything from me. The confession hit like a tidal wave, washing over Jack with a sense of disbelief and betrayal. Ben had sabotaged the wedding. Not for any reason other than his own bitterness. And the worst part was that Jack could hear the pain in his voice. The deep-seated hurt that had led to this moment. The family business. The respect. The love. Everything that Jack had worked so hard for had been the source of his brother's anger. I never meant for it to go this far, Ben continued, his voice cracking slightly. I didn't want anyone to get hurt. But I couldn't just stand by and watch you take everything. Everything I thought should have been mine. Jack's mind was reeling. He couldn't process the words. Couldn't understand how his own brother could go to such lengths to destroy something so important to him. Lily stood beside him, her hand gripping his tightly, her face pale with shock. Ben, Jack whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. You could have killed someone. You don't just ruin a wedding for petty revenge. This is wrong. Ben's eyes welled with unshed tears. I know, he said quietly. I know it was wrong. I didn't think it would get this far. I thought I could just make a point. But now, his voice trailed off, the weight of what he had done settling in. Jack wanted to scream, wanted to shout at Ben for being so reckless, for being so selfish, but something inside him shifted. Beneath the anger, beneath the betrayal, there was sorrow, sorrow for the brother he had lost to his own bitterness. And though Jack knew it was too late for apologies, he realized that Ben had never needed forgiveness from him. What he needed was a way to heal. A way to move on from the pain that had consumed him for so long. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this," Jack said, his voice strained. "But you've ruined more than just this wedding. Ben, you've ruined our family, and it's going to take more than an apology to fix that." The air between them was thick with tension. And as Ben stood there, his face unreadable, Jack felt the weight of a lifetime of unresolved issues crash down on him. Their relationship, once filled with hope and possibility, had been torn apart by the ghosts of the past. And now, there was no going back. The confession hung in the air like an insurmountable weight, and the silence that followed was deafening. Guests stood in small clusters, murmuring to one another in disbelief, their eyes flickering between Ben and Jack. The wedding that had been meant to celebrate love, unity, and a new beginning now seemed tainted by the bitterness and regret that had plagued Jack's relationship with his brother for so long. Lily's hand in Jack's was the only tether he had to reality in that moment. And he clung to it like a lifeline. Ben stood there, his eyes downcast, his hands trembling at his sides. There was no pride in his posture, no arrogance. For the first time in years, Jack saw his brother for what he truly was. A man who had been swallowed whole by his own jealousy and rage. And while Jack's heart ached for him, the pain of betrayal was too fresh, too deep to ignore. The family had been ripped apart, and no apology would ever fix the damage. "I never meant for it to go this far," Ben said again, his voice small, almost pleading. "I just wanted to make you understand. I wanted to prove that I wasn't some lesser son, that I mattered too." His voice cracked as the weight of his actions seemed to finally catch up with him. Jack shook his head, his chest tight with emotion. "I can't fix this for you, Ben. This wasn't about you feeling overlooked. This was about hurting people who had nothing to do with your anger. My wife, our family, all of this." He gestured vaguely to the guests, who had turned their backs to the scene, now whispering amongst themselves. "Was supposed to be a celebration, and you turned it into a nightmare." Lily stood quietly beside Jack, her face pale but composed. She reached up to gently touch his arm, a silent gesture of support. The love she had for him was evident in her touch, and Jack felt a pang of guilt. In the midst of his own turmoil, he had almost forgotten the most important thing, the woman standing by his side. The woman who had trusted him to protect her and their future together. "We need to move on," Lily said quietly, her voice soft but firm. "We need to focus on what matters now. This day may be ruined, but we're not." Her words were like a bomb on Jack's battered heart. He looked at her, really looked at her, and realized that despite everything, despite the betrayal, despite the chaos, he still had her. And together, they could rebuild. Together, they could find a way to move forward. "I'm sorry, Lily," Jack whispered, his voice trembling. "I promised you a perfect day. I promised you a perfect life. And I failed you." She shook her head, her eyes soft with understanding. "You didn't fail me, Jack. We didn't fail each other. It wasn't supposed to go like this. But we'll find a way through. We always do." The guests slowly began to disperse, their hushed conversations carrying across the now silent garden. The once vibrant atmosphere was now subdued, the weight of the day's events lingering in the air like a storm that had yet to pass. But amidst the uncertainty and heartbreak, there was a glimmer of hope. Jack had Lily by his side. And Max, their loyal dog, was still there, his head resting at their feet like a silent sentinel. In that moment, Jack realized that they had something far more valuable than a perfect wedding day. They had each other. As the last of the guests filtered out of the garden, Jack turned to Lily. "Let's get out of here," he said quietly. "Let's go somewhere far away from all this." Lily nodded, her face showing signs of exhaustion but also determination. "I'm with you. Let's go home, Jack." The ride home was quiet, the hum of the car's engine the only sound filling the space between them. Jack's mind was still reeling from everything that had happened, the wedding, the betrayal, the confession, but he knew that this was just the beginning. He had to find a way to heal, to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. He couldn't change the past, but he could shape the future. As they arrived at their home, Jack looked at Lily, her tired eyes meeting his. She didn't have to say anything. The weight of the day had taken its toll on them both. But there was a quiet resolve in the way she held his hand. I don't know what's next, Lily, Jack said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. But I do know one thing. I'm not giving up on us. She smiled faintly, leaning in to kiss him gently on the cheek. We'll figure it out, Jack, together. And with that, the storm of emotions began to settle. Like the calm after a tempest. There was a long road ahead, filled with questions and uncertainties. But they had each other. And that, in the end, was enough. As the days passed, the chaos of the wedding began to fade into the background, replaced by a newfound sense of resilience between Jack and Lily. Their love, though tested, had only grown stronger. They spent long hours talking, healing, and finding ways to rebuild what had been shattered. The betrayal by Ben, though painful, had forced them to confront their own fears, insecurities, and the weight of family expectations. But through it all, they remained united, a steady force against the storm. Though their wedding day was nothing like they had imagined, they had learned something profound, that life's most precious moments aren't always perfect. But they are real. They embraced the imperfections, finding beauty in the rawness of their journey. With each passing day, their bond deepened, and they knew that no matter what challenges came their way, they would face them together. As they stood on the threshold of a new chapter in their lives, Jack and Lily knew that the road ahead would not always be smooth. But with love as their guide, they were ready to face whatever came their way, stronger and more determined than ever before. Their wedding, though marred by tragedy, had ultimately revealed the true meaning of commitment, resilience, and the power of forgiveness. If you'd like to hear more stories of life's challenges and triumphs, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for new updates and videos. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time.